Why don't I see anything? I don't know. It pretty much looks like everyone. So our next session is the student activism panel, and it features 3 campus coordinators who are in the campus coordinator program of Students for Liberty. And so that program basically trains students to be activists on their campus, spreading pro-liberty messages. But it goes beyond that. I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, the reason why I think SFL is so successful is because they really invest in their students. And we believe that empowering individuals is what actually perpetuates change. It's not simply just spreading a libertarian message just because you want everyone to be libertarians. The skills that they learn, like networking skills, leadership skills, just organizing in general, I mean, I'm still learning clearly. These are skills that they can take away into their professional lives, and I think that if people are successful in their professional lives, that enables them to make the world a better place. It sounds so cheesy, but I don't know how else to say it. And so in the Campus Coordinator program, there's an interview process at first, and if you were accepted, there is online training about 4 weeks long online. And then we fly you up to Washington, D.C. for a more in-depth leadership skills training session, and before the school year starts. And you're not just left to the wolves after that. There's people like me out there who, throughout the year, checking on you, asking if you need help. And so, yeah, I highly recommend getting involved. And if it's something you want to do, go to our website, studentsforliberty.org/UC, and someone on staff will get back to you once you complete that application process. And so now I'm going to introduce the person who's going to introduce Pretty Meta, the student panel, Phil Johnston. I'm so grateful for Phil. I'm so happy.
Yeah.
I moved here last year. Last year I knew absolutely no one in Vancouver. Toronto and moved here to school. And Phil and I met 4 years ago at a barbecue, but I didn't really talk to him. We were just Facebook friends, and I knew he was a good person, so I just reached out and said, hey, like, I'm starting a Students for Liberty club, and also I need friends. And eventually, he was so instrumental in helping me start my club at SFU, and it's just turned into now we're partners in crime, spreading liberty in Vancouver. So thank you very much, Phil, for being here, and I'm so honored to have you moderate this panel. So take it away.
Hello, can you hear me? All right. Well, thank you for that introduction, Liz. So it's my great honor to introduce to you all our student panel today. I'll start on the left, right here. We have our first panelist is from out of town. She lives in Bellingham, Washington, and studies anthropology and theater at Western Washington University, and she's also the Students for Liberty campus coordinator there. Just met her for the first time, and when I asked her earlier what are some of the topics she'd like to talk about, she immediately rifled off like 10 different topics. So I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. Give it up for Katrina Hafner. Our next panelist, he's originally from Brazil and studies computer engineering at UBC, also the campus coordinator there. I remember actually the first time I met him, it was at a libertarian meetup, and we were discussing topics, and he showed up, and suddenly the whole room was full of his passion and enthusiasm for libertarianism. So please give it up for Rodrigo Proenza. And finally, originally from South Africa, she now lives in Vancouver studying music composition at Simon Fraser University and is campus coordinator there. And she's also president of SFU Advocacy for Men and Boys that is also sponsored by Students for Liberty. And I just want to pimp their event happening tomorrow that Karen will be speaking at again, 6:30 SFU Harbor Center for you to attend. And she's an outspoken libertarian, critic of feminism, and I'm proud to say a colleague of mine, Theron Meyer. All right, so we can start with this jamboree. So I think this panel to me is kind of the heart of the conference in a way, because young people, Students for Liberty recognize this. Young people are crucial to any movement and are crucial to the libertarian community because they have the vision to take this movement into the future. So one of the questions I wanted to start with is, I can certainly identify with this, and sometimes people can become passive consumers of ideas that they really like. They don't necessarily become advocates, but we have 3 people here that have stepped up and really decided to make a change and spread libertarian ideas. I'd just like to pass this question on to you first. What was the moment you realized that you needed to step up and make a difference and advocate for libertarian ideas? We can start with Katrina here.
I first became politically involved when I was in high school. I don't know what caused me to become politically involved, but I knew that I had to go out there and strive to make a difference. Back then, I considered myself to be a conservative Republican, and after I graduated high school, I realized I was becoming more and more upset with the Republican establishment, so I went out to look for something new, something that more aligned with what I believed in, and I stumbled upon libertarianism. And so for these past 5 years, I've been learning more and more about libertarianism. It's a never-ending adventure. I always learn something new. There's so many things to learn about concerning libertarian policy and philosophy. And so I just knew that this was libertarianism is something that more and more people need, because they're realizing that they don't fit the status quo. They want something that reflects what they believe in. And for a lot of people, that thing is libertarianism. And for a growing number of people, that thing will be libertarianism once they realize what good solutions it offers, and most importantly, what criticism libertarians have to offer to the establishment and other established theories and thoughts that society places upon us.
Well, I remember when I was like 7 years old, and my dad asked, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? I said, I'm going to be the president of Brazil. And everybody, like, all my family started laughing, but my dad was like, no, you might if you work hard for it. So I think, like, Brazil, I'm originally from Brazil, is a really poor country, as you guys know. And I come from a relatively well-off family. But I wanted to do something about it. Like, I went out on the streets, I saw so much poverty, I was like, yeah, like, I have to do something about it. Like, it's not fair. But I was a kid, I didn't understand how the world worked. So, and in Brazil, you have a lot of indoctrination at school. So for a long time, I was like, kind of like communist. Like, no, you have to like take from the rich and give to those poor people in the streets. But as I started studying about economics and free markets, I realized that that wasn't like the best way to make people better off. So, I think it's something that just came naturally. I always wanted to like improve the world, and I think the data shows. As an engineering student, I really like numbers. I think the data shows free markets work. So I think being a campus coordinator is a way of making this reality true.
I started becoming a bit involved in libertarianism as soon as I became a libertarian. And that was the beginning of the year, actually. I'm a very non-reliable kind of person, so I became really obsessed. And I just binge listen to podcasts and libertarian and stuff. But it was basically just a logical, it followed logically from libertarianism. If we don't want other people or governments to get things done because they do it badly, who else is going to do it but the individuals? So I think it's kind of a natural step for libertarians to take matters in their own hands, simply because that's kind of what their principles hold them. So yeah, that's basically what I became politically involved.
Thank you. So for my next question, I want to ask you guys about your experience as campus coordinators on university campuses. I'd love to hear what your experience has been, what the positive experience has been, and I'm particularly interested in, we've heard a bit about the climate of free speech right now, particularly on university campuses. Could you talk a bit about that as well? What is the climate of free speech like at your particular university?
I think I'm an interesting case as a campus coordinator because I had already been an activist for a number of years, including on my campus. And so when I was first told about the campus coordinator program, and when I attended the CC session at the 2014 ISFLC, I was skeptical on whether or not I wanted to apply, but then decided, why not? And so I did. And even though a lot of their training is focused on people who don't have much experience, it's always good to get a reminder. And why make 10 mistakes on your own and have to learn it after 8 months of being an activist instead of other activists telling you, no, do not do it that way. You should do it this way, or it might work if you do it this way. And so the CC program kind of made me wish that I had known about it sooner. And what it has offered me as a more experienced campus activist is just the number of resources they've given me, physical, online. It's always great getting pamphlets from them that teach about libertarianism, drug policy, older webinars, and other online resources. And then what I probably enjoy most is the networking, going to all of these conferences and meeting new people. Even though I'm pretty introverted, I still manage to get to meet more people and establish long-lasting relationships. Sorry, I've been sick for like 2 weeks. And so my school is pretty, I don't know if I can actually say that it's kind of an outlier because I don't know what all the other schools are like. My school, Western Washington University, is known as being pretty liberal, if not leftist. However, we actually place a good emphasis on the importance of free speech and expression. At the beginning of every school year, all the clubs have to go to a mandatory club orientation to learn about budget training, the database, and all that. And starting last year, there's been this quiz that we divide into groups and participate in. And one of the questions was, which place on campus is Red Square the only free speech zone on campus? And the answer was either true or false. Out of over 100 students, I would say that fewer than 5 people got it correct. Everybody thought that Red Square was the only free speech zone on campus. Although the club advisor told us that the entire campus is a free speech zone. So at my school, I don't think it's so much that the administration is the problem, and I'm sure there are policies that that do need to be changed. I haven't exactly found them yet, but it's the students who don't know, who are afraid of getting in trouble, and therefore are kind of stuck in their own boxes, thinking that if they do a certain something, then the administration will be out to get them. And so what one of my clubs, the Western Libertarians, has been trying to do is educate people on what the First Amendment is and how it translates to college and the rest of their lives.
Well, I think a lot of people saw what happened in UBC. There was this controversy about free speech. I think I'm not really sure about the details, but I know that teacher said something, and then she was like scolded for saying that. I think this is not a problem only at UBC. I think everywhere in the Western world there is a lot of this thing of political correctness, and I think it's something has already been discussed here. But I think university has, for millennia, been the place where people are able to exchange different ideas. And I think we should really preserve this idea and fight for it, because that's where new ideas happen. That's where Google happens. That's where new movements happen. So I think this UBC controversy and things that happen in the US all the time, I check my friends who study there, there's always some sort of thing. I think that should raise a red flag. Regarding my experience as a campus coordinator, I think it's been a great experience. I think it takes you, well, I started the club as a transfer student, so I didn't know anybody at UBC, but I still decided to open it anyway. And I think it really teaches you how to start things, how to be an entrepreneur. And I think once I graduate, I want to open my own business eventually. I think it really taught me certain skills that will be very helpful in the future. Just connecting with other amazing people, networking with them. So I really recommend it.
I've never first-hand experience at my university with free speech being compromised in the sense that as president of one club and secretary, I think, of the Vancouver Students' Union, I've never had an event shut down by the university government. So free speech has not been compromised in that kind of formal sense, but with the very kind of authoritarian, far left, I guess, air on campus, orthodoxy on campus. There's this sense of, there's this attitude of like, a lot of students have this attitude of they would be happy to see events that don't share their views be shut down. Like it would make them happy if those people couldn't speak. And I don't really personally understand it. That, for example, I don't consider myself, for example, feminist, but if I wouldn't be happy if feminists somehow are not to speak on campus, that would make me happy. But I find that with students a lot. And that attitude and that general air on campus, like moral authority and like, yeah, just that kind of air on authority makes it so much harder to speak up and have a dissenting opinion. And that's it's not kind of institutional, it's kind of an attitude that a lot of people on campus have, which makes it more complex as to how to kind of tackle that. And then there's the issue of quote-unquote safe spaces. And I feel like the word safe has been co-opted in a way that you can't disagree with it, because why would someone disagree with a space that is safe? But like, there's nothing more safe about a space in which you can only share one ideological perspective. That doesn't make it safer, but it's been painted in that way so as to guilt you into not being for it. Because if you're not for it, then you're against what, violence and the lack of safety. So there's a lot of weirdness on my campus and on campuses in general. But yeah, that's my experience with it.
Cool. All right. For my next question, it comes from that idea that I think young minds are so important to the future of the movement. And I think I'd like to get your feedback on libertarian movement in general. So I can try and paint a picture like libertarianism is a company, or it's like say libertarianism was on Tinder, what would make you swipe left? What would make you swipe right? So my question is basically, if you could just group the libertarian community into one block, what's something that you like about what libertarians are doing, and what's something you think could be improved upon or should be done differently?
Well, when I think about the stereotypical image of libertarians, I think of the libertarian Facebook group, which is full of people who are Islamophobic, racist, trolls of every kind, and if you don't agree with them, then you're stupid, idiotic, and not a real libertarian. And so I think getting to the core of the issue, it's that that you always need to be critical of what you believe in. I'm a feminist. I'm also critical of feminism. I'm a libertarian. I'm also critical of libertarianism. And so you need to keep an open mindset. And even though libertarians think, yes, I'm so alternative, I believe these views that the establishment don't believe in, they still have that same closed mindset because they're not willing to look at other viewpoints, examine other viewpoints. But I find that most of these problems are with older libertarians. I've been finding that the millennial libertarians, like what you mostly find with Students for Liberty, are more into weighing the good and bad aspects of their views, want to debate in a good, healthy environment, not to put others down, but to learn ideas by communicating with people they don't necessarily agree with. So I think it's good to keep in mind that you do not know all the answers, even though sometimes you may think you do, and to keep an open mind and place yourself in situations where you may be uncomfortable so that you can learn from them. In the theater class this quarter, our professor was talking to us about trigger warnings and the idea of like whether it's censoring speech or providing an aid for those who need it. And she reminded us that supposedly it's a pretty common adage in the education system, is that people learn in uncomfortable spaces. And so we need to keep that in mind and not confine ourselves to an echo chamber.
I think libertarianism, the positive aspect is that there are a lot of really good think tanks that support what we say. So I think a lot of the things, when the left is trying to convince people about their ideas, they try to appeal to emotions. And we libertarians, we have a lot of data, we have a lot of statistics, a lot of great books that can support what we're saying, a lot of great resources. I think we also have a lot of very good people that are engaged in the movement, very entrepreneurs. So I think one libertarian is very productive compared to, I don't know, like a communist or some sort of thing. The bad things, I think I agree with Catherine. I think one thing I see a lot here in Brazil, in US, and I think it's something we have to learn with the communists, is that infighting doesn't work to spread ideas. I think if you try to make everybody agree with every single issue with you, nobody's gonna, like the ideas of liberty, the underlying ideas we all agree, are not gonna be implemented, are not gonna go forward. So I think libertarians sometimes have to compromise a little bit their ideas in order to implement the most fundamental things. And I think it's really hard. The communists couldn't do it because, like, we have Lenin and Mao and Stalin. Each one had their own philosophy. They started fighting. Of course, it didn't work because the philosophy was really bad. but one of the reasons why I think it didn't last as much was because there was a lot of fighting. They tried to compromise. The second thing is that it's something I'm seeing a lot in Brazil. I'm really happy it's going on right now. I don't see as much in Canada, but I see that it can improve in the future. Is that the ideas are very good, but we need more people selling it. And when I say selling the ideas, I'm not only saying the students, but also the mainstream media. I see a lot of journalists, very famous journalists in Brazil saying that they are blatant libertarians, they're like 100% libertarians. And I think that raises a lot of awareness about those ideas. So I think now it's the time for us to spread. The ideas are good, but we need people to spread. So I think it's something it's lacking right now, but Students for Liberty and a lot of other organizations are making it happen.
So I guess one good thing that I've experienced on libertarianism is, especially like social issues, how libertarians tackle social issues is in much contrast with how I experience people tackling social issues on campus. And their political leanings are usually kind of authoritarian, person. I don't want to trash any people who do identify as that, but like authoritarian kind of attitudes. There's this idea of like, I am right, and if you don't agree with me, you are misogynist, racist, or whatever. Even if you made a reasonable point, or if you argued it rationally. But what I find with, say, let's say, libertarian feminists like Katrina, or any of the other libertarian feminists that are supporters, there's at least the attitude of like, I might be wrong, you know? The possibility of me being wrong, me being right is there. I don't find that with, that's not my experience at university. The possibility of me being wrong is not one, it's not necessary. Bad thing, I think there are a lot of libertarians, and there's also whereas I can say the same thing about women's rights movement. There are a lot of people who just sit behind the laptop and complain about stuff. And I complain about advocacy work that other people are doing, and they think they're doing it wrong. So that's frustrating. Yeah.
Great, so we've got about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to make time for each of you to talk about a particular issue or topic that's close to your heart related to libertarianism. I think let's start with Rodrigo. You wanted to say a few words about public education.
Yeah, so like, I've always been very connected with education. I think one of the things I've seen that makes countries like develop really fast is having a good educational system. You can see Singapore, Hong Kong, they have the best educational systems in the world. And before I came here to Canada, me and 3 other friends that were pretty libertarian, we founded an NGO that prepped low-income students in Brazil to get into the top universities. We have like 100 students right now, so it's really cool. It's one of my big accomplishments. But the thing I realized is how we really wanted to help the students, but how bad their education was. It's really, when you think that it's like bad, it can be worse. It can be worse. And just last week, I was reading the news in Brazil, and they did a poll of adults in Brazil about their math skills. 75% of Brazilian adults don't understand the concept of fractions. And almost all of them go to public schools in Brazil. So you spend 12 years learning math, and you don't know what fraction is. So that really shows me the government doesn't work very well, especially in education. And I got some other data to show how bad governments are at educating a population. So, for example, half of children in South Asia cannot read after 4 years of schooling. 1/3 in Africa can't read after 4 years of schooling. And here in Canada, the education is, if you see the international rankings, the education is good. It's one of the best Western countries in terms of education. But it's at the same level as Vietnam, a country that is 20 times poorer than Canada. So Canada is pretty good in education, but at what cost? So couldn't it be more efficient? So what I wanted to talk about education is what I think the government does wrong and how I think we could solve really fast. So the first thing is like, I see in Brazil is regulation. So people don't even understand fractions, and they have to learn 13 different subjects, including ancient Portuguese literature. So why would you learn that if you cannot read properly? But you have to, because the government says you have to. So the first thing I think the government does is being very strict on what people say. What if you taught them basic math and then taught them programming? I think that would help them much more than ancient Portuguese literature, taking them out of poverty. I think indoctrination also, I think in Brazil, I remember when I was learning about China and Cuba, they always mention Che Guevara and Stalin as revolutionaries, as people that had different ideas and just, it didn't work out. But the thing is they were like mass murderers, and they don't label them as mass murderers, but that's what they were. They were worse than Hitler. Mao killed, I think, like 30 million people. It's like crazy. And I've actually came across that number because I was reading my textbook and it seemed so revolutionary. And then I was like, oh no, we killed 30 million people. So I had to do my own independent research to come to that information. But how many millions of Brazilians still think the guy is really cool, So, and I think public education is really strict. Like, I think it's really slow to change. We live in the 21st century, and I think this idea of just getting people about the same age group in a classroom is not efficient anymore. So I think there are a lot of different things going on right now. I'm really passionate about, but I don't have time. But I think the internet is changing things like Duolingo that takes foreign languages, Code Academy that takes you programming, Khan Academy. In Africa, there are private schools that are $1, and the research shows they're better than public schools. It's not, you're not gonna get like an Ivy League education, but for them, it's better than what the government offers. So I think libertarianism should focus a lot in education, since I think letting the markets do the job is a better way than just.
Well said. I'd like to go to Theron next. Would you like to talk about, yes, if you had issue from the Woods Club? Maybe why you started that?
Do you want to ask me a question? Where should I start?
Wherever you want.
Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences more in my closing remarks at the end. But so I noticed a lot of like anti-male bias on the campus at SFU. While I was kind of involved in like social justice kind of stuff. And I never realized that in order to have a better condition for trans people or women or whatever, that you have to something be biased and kind of lacking compassion for men. I didn't realize that was one of the criteria. So that was very weird for me. And then I made a couple of enemies on campus, and then I distanced myself, became monomaniacal, and became a libertarian and a men's rights activist. And then I contacted Liz because I needed help from some campus, and I thought the libertarian, some club, and I thought the libertarian club on campus would probably be supportive. So with her help and with Phil's help, we started the SFU Advocacy Human Voice, and our first talk was on missing and murdered Indigenous men. And that was in early October. That was really great. And then the second one was on men's issues 101. As we mentioned, the next one is tomorrow. We decided to be a little bit more controversial, and it might even be a protest. It's on toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. Karen will be talking about toxic gender behavior, and I'm so excited to hear how but yeah, and issues that the SFA will be constantly bringing up and raising awareness about is stuff like circumcision, the high rates of male suicide, all of that kind of stuff, like the stop men's issues and stuff that we decided we can do more. And yeah, there's a donation to our own site. I think that's it. I'm going to talk a little bit more in my closing remarks. If this sounds kind of like the end of all the time.
Actually, again, I'd like to hear from you, Katrina, next. You mentioned a number of subjects. Really, anything you want to talk about. I thought it was interesting you mentioned wanting to maybe say something about reaching out to groups that might be perceived as rivals, and how you might go about doing that in terms of teaming up with them as the students really agree with it. Share your thoughts on what we're talking about.
Sure, well, this is actually a topic I address a lot because when I come to conferences like these, there are some panelists or some members of the audience who say, oh, those people on the left, they try to ruin everything. And actually next week in Portland, next Saturday, I'll be having a conference there, so if you're free. And there are some people in the area who are absolutely convinced that leftists are going to take over the event and just, I really don't know. Yeah, and I really don't think that will happen. For one, if they do know about it, they probably don't care. But then to the people I have been reaching out to, because we have talks on criminal justice reform and the criminalization of sex work. I've been reaching out to people about those topics, and the people who are part of those organizations probably lean at least a little bit to the left. So you just find topics that both your groups care about. For example, drug policy is a huge topic for me, and you'll find that there are a number of left organizations who like to focus on those topics as well. And then, let's say you can't find a topic, or, I mean, I'm pretty sure you can find a topic, but if you want to switch things up a little bit and concentrate on a topic that you and another group may disagree on, then you can hold a friendly debate. A couple of years ago, the Western Libertarians hosted a debate on gun control. And so we had a man from the Whatcom Libertarians who is very much an advocate for open carry, come to the school to debate the president of the Whatcom Democrats. And it was kind of funny, the school thought that there might, I don't know, they probably thought something may go very wrong with the event, so they sent security, or they said they would send security, they ended up not doing that. But it was a very friendly debate. It looked like the audience enjoyed it, and both the debaters enjoyed it very much. And so if you have a debate, which I highly encourage you to do, so that you're allowing the audience to make decisions for themselves rather than just having a speaker speak at them. If you have a debate, just realize that it doesn't have to be one versus the other. Of course, that's the format of a debate, but it doesn't have to be the mindset of what the debate is about. Remember that having debates is all about letting people open their mind. I've been talking about this pretty much the whole time being up here, but letting people decide things for themselves, not having to throw answers at them. And so, yeah, I think having debates and finding issues that the different organizations agree on are two different ways to reach out to others, and also remembering that to not other people, which means it's us versus them. We're all human, and so I really doubt that people from other groups like to be categorized as the other.
Nice. Well, it's been awesome hearing your ideas. We are actually out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Please give it up. All
right, see you guys back at 2:30. And thanks, Phil, you're awesome.
Hello. Heard the exchange you guys were having over there, and I want to get your thoughts on the
You're media?
Oh no, not me. I'm not the media. No, I'm just. So I just want to get.
What's this thing?
Yes. actually goes back. I want to get your thoughts on the whole. So I know you guys had a debate about democracy. Yeah, and I'm actually kind of in the middle because I do think libertarianism, but I think
Yeah, I don't know if anyone's listening right now, but
well,
you'll hear it. No, I'm talking to the live stream
oh,
people.
sorry.
I don't kind of short, so you won't really see the rest of me, but whatever. We'll make do.
I think democracy is too as to Russia, as to Africa, as to China. I think democracy is too their job of limiting the cases exists that US countries do. So that's why I get like your thoughts on the like conservative debate. I was actually kind of like it's good points. It's like they're talking like an opt-out system. Which I guess I'm in favor for that.
I just, I fundamentally don't believe that you can ever do anything. And this utopian idea, someone skip up, for any society to be civil, to survive, requires some authority that will prevent the strong from beating up on the weak to do advantage. And so I don't think you have a choice to opt out. And humans are social creatures. We get born into relationships. And, obviously your mom, and your dad, and there might be aunts and uncles and neighbors and community. And you go through life in terms of a relationship. Your employer, your buyer or seller, all of life is relationship. The person who says, I want absolute libertarian or liberty, seems to suggest that the individual can exist cut off from all relationship. And I think that's just impossible. You just can't survive. Socrates had the option of drinking the cup of poison or to be banished from the city. And he chose to drink the cup of poison because he said to be condemned to solitary confinement is to be less than human. And I think this is a lot of truth there. To be human is to be in relationship with people. And anytime you have any kind of organized society, you need a central authority. So I just think that there's no choice about that. And if that is the case, then I prefer an authority that is democratic to one that is totalitarian.
So I think a cause of libertarians talk about this really long time as individual sovereignty. But obviously there's a spectrum of absolute do whatever you want, but then you put other people's rights though, and sometimes you do that with absolute tyranny and slave rights. And I think libertarians should be realistic about how we achieve that goal of individual sovereignty. I think democracy is right now the best thing we have. I think representative democracy is better in some ways.
Oh, there's absolutely no doubt about it. It's not perfection.
Yes.
And no system is perfect. But to me, you want to maximize citizen participation in the ruling function.
Assuming they're educated.
Well, I know that, but I guess I think, if you include everyone, you're going to include a percentage of people who aren't really qualified.
Yeah.
But it's very, very dangerous to start excluding. And that's a greater danger than simply allowing people to make mistakes.
If you're 6 feet, more dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
then
Allowing them to make mistakes.
what are your thoughts on, I don't think I should put this over either, but what are your thoughts on like this? You get a PhD, you get 2 votes, and you don't vote, or if you're
Oh, terrible.
You think so?
Yeah, it's I find that offensive. And people have a different set of skills, different abilities, yes, but there's enormous diversity. But I do not want to see us give up on the ideal of democracy. The ideal of democracy is that given the opportunities, education and so on, any person could or has it within you to reach the potential of being competent to govern. No, that was Lincoln's. You're from the U.S. I think President Lincoln was the greatest president of the United States. No, if he saw what's happening to the system today and the influence of money, he'd be so hard. Because that goes so contrary to everything he did. And the reason he fought the Civil War was not over slavery, it was to save the Union. And why did he want to save the Union? Because if the Union went, democracy would go. He saw the Union as a kind of a wonderful experiment in democracy. And he was so afraid that the Union would go because then democracy would be there. And to him, democracy was that every human being, every member of the human family has it within themselves, given the right opportunities and stuff, to develop the potential to be in a ruling country. And that it wasn't, it had nothing to do with inheritance, class, money. And I think that is still maybe it's too idealistic. Any attempt to weed out people on whatever criteria is fought with them.
I think that the better is he was actually a great direct president. I think that's a major mistakes, but I think those chances that he's a good because he gets the same behaviors. He was bad. But at the same time, though, I think he was actually, I would say he was the best, but he definitely gets out there. I would say top 5 because he did sort of really try to indirectly, he wanted to say the union also indirectly to expand rights to the African Americans individuals. So he did want this. He did a lot of great things. He did that he was to the libertarians and therefore brought expanding rights. That should not be this right for person those who are negative to have rights as well. So I think that's at the same time I look at the argument for new conservatism, like if you want to argue that point, then one could say, hey, we should back new conservatives and say we should spend rights in the world. So that's one potential drawback. What are your thoughts on that? I talk really fast sometimes too. Sorry if you guys don't think I talk really fast.
Yeah. What exactly would you question?
So like we can want to save the union, but also want to indirectly expand rights to slaves. So we'll make the argument that you want to expand rights to slaves, you want to expand the political process to people. So what would the counterpoint be for new conservatives saying let's expand rights to people of countries? What would what are your thoughts on that?
I think we need to expand human rights to all members of the human race. And that is to me absolutely foundational. In Canada, for instance, we just went through the election where a few Muslim women wanted to wear a particular form of headdress, which to most Canadians would be in itself quite offensive. The Prime Minister made it today, he's gone now, but he made a big deal of this. He said, we're going to deny them to do that, right? Harper. And I thought that was offensive. I don't like to see women dress that way. But if that is genuinely held and it's not coerced, and they really want that for themselves, I don't think the state has any right to say you may not do that. So I would extend those rights to people who, in some ways, I think behave in a way that is not fair, that is offensive.
Plus, if you ban it, then you might check if you like you don't stop it. You actually kind of if you try to ban something, you give some legitimacy, like like banning the law prohibition to someone in the United States. But you said you want to explain rights to anybody with human rights. What are your thoughts on what's the best way to explain rights to human rights?
Well, you use law, but the best ways, to me, is through education, through civil society, through moms and dads, through neighborhoods, being open and tolerant. Because, laws alone are a very blunt instrument. So, we're going to have a better world. It has to start in the homes, in the schools, in the kind of intermediate structures of society. Very important to people. When, President Johnston moved some very important legislation in the 1960s for civil rights. Okay, the books show that there should be no discrimination against blacks, but it didn't change.
little bit more informal introduction to Jodie Emery. Jodie Emery is a longtime cannabis advocate, political activist, and public speaker based right here in Vancouver. As owner of cannabis culture stores and vapor lounges, cannabisculture.com and Pot TV, she regularly appears in mainstream and alternative media. Additionally, she has completed 4 political election campaigns. Jodie is married to Mark Emery, the famous Prince of Pot, who donated millions of dollars for marijuana seed sales to global legalization efforts and was released from U.S. prison in 2014 after serving 5 years for his activism. Please help me in welcoming Jodie Emery.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for having me. And it's very exciting because I guess I don't like labels, so I don't want to say I'm a libertarian because then a bunch of people suddenly imagine me in a way that I don't even understand because I haven't really read any books. The most I've gotten into it was reading Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead years and years ago, and that kind of changed my mind about the way I thought about the world. But even further back, when I was in high school, I was actually against marijuana. I was against drugs and drinking. Anything fun that teenagers did, I was kind of against. And opposed to teacher's pet, authoritarian. I loved seeing people in uniform, marching. Like, I don't know, somehow I'm a Star Wars fan and I loved the good side, but I really thought that the Empire looked slick. You know, like all matching uniforms, lockstep. I don't want to lead that kind of group. But then my friends introduced me to cannabis culture and Pot TV. And even though I gave them a very hard time about being so stupid that they'd smoke pot, they may as well just go kill themselves now because it's that insane to do. They helped me get educated through media, through Mark Emery's online video network, Pot TV, one of the first video websites ever on the internet in the year 2000 was launched, and Cannabis Culture magazine. And when I decided to finally try smoking pot, it blew my mind, not because I got high, but because I realized how much I'd been lied to, that I was told marijuana was bad, and then I realized it wasn't, and that made me question what else isn't true that I've been told. And then 9/11 happened, and there's all this talk of oil wars and military-industrial complex and all sorts of things that, I'm a teenager in grade 10 going to grade 11. I was in grade 11 when 9/11 happened, and I just had, that's a time when your mind is really developing, a lot of new ideas are coming in. And so I started to question authority a lot. And when I moved to Vancouver here in 2004, it was to become a marijuana activist, to work for Mark Emery. But even at that time, I was still of the mindset that marijuana legalization is good, but use all the police resources to arrest the other drug users. Go after the people who use coke or heroin. So I hadn't yet developed my thinking far enough to realize that, beyond marijuana being a safe substance that helps people live their lives and saves lives, it's wrong for government to tell you what you can and cannot do with your own body. And over time, I came to that realization, and that's how I moved on to being an anti-prohibitionist, meaning that I think all drugs should be legal. I think that prohibition is a failed policy with respect to drugs and prostitution and other issues too. Not to say that if we ended the prohibition on murder, everybody would be like, yippee, I was just waiting for that to happen. Let me go get me an axe and start getting to it. Like, the law isn't stopping people from using drugs or engaging in prostitution. It doesn't even stop people from murdering. That's usually a crime of passion. But really, my mind about liberty and libertarian ideas opened up in 2006. A guy named Ron Paul was in the U.S. Congress, and my husband, Mark Emery, decided to take it upon himself to do an election issue in our Cannabis Culture magazine and print. And the election issue had basically a review of every member of Congress. You can imagine. Mark went through every member of Congress, all of their voting records on issues from the drug war, to the hemp bills, to the Patriot Act, and all sorts of issues related to war and liberty and the drug war. And he created a ranking system. And the person who came out on top for the liberty of the marijuana movement was this Ron Paul guy, a Republican from Texas, a white male Republican from Texas. And to tell the marijuana movement that that's who we should get behind was not an easy task, because you can imagine the marijuana movement was very left-wing leaning, but that's when I started to think, it doesn't matter what your label is. Do you believe in liberty or not? Do you believe in government having control of your life or not? And a phrase that I keep coming up with when I thought of government and what they do, I figured it's, government is basically there to stop you from doing things you do want to do and make you do things you don't want to do. And that, the idea of government to me started to really, it bothered me. It was this idea that not only are you ostracized for believing something like marijuana should be legal, but marijuana prohibition has been used by authoritarian groups, by governments overseas, to control population. Marijuana prohibition is a massive civil rights violation, and this goes really deep. And right now, everyone's excited about legalization, Justin Trudeau, things are changing in Washington State, Colorado. There's so much happening. I can't even keep on top of all the law reform that's taking place. But when I started activism in 2004, it was really difficult to come out and argue in favor of legalization. It was not as easy as it is today. And today, it's impossible to find someone to debate in favor of prohibition. And that started changing about 2 years ago. I started getting fewer and fewer opportunities to debate. Everyone agreed. It never used to be like that. And what we found over time is that it didn't matter if you're a libertarian or socialist or communist or whatever, people smoke pot. And everybody knows someone smokes pot. And there's probably people with ideologies I don't agree with, but they consume marijuana. And they don't really realize how much marijuana prohibition affects their daily life and affects the civil liberties of all citizens, even those who don't use marijuana. So prohibition has been used to justify a massive growth in the prison complex, the industrial prison complex, private prisons, for-profit prisons. It's led to police having powers of surveillance and the ability to detain people on ridiculous reasons. And prohibition has taken away people's freedoms, even when they don't get arrested and go to prison. I made a little list because I'm trying to think of all the ways that marijuana prohibition violates people's civil liberties and ruins lives. And it's quite a lot. In the first place, if you do get arrested, that's a criminal record, and it will follow you forever. Many people, especially in the United States, a lot of young people cannot get a scholarship. And if they are in school, post-secondary education, they're going to be expelled or suspended. They can lose their scholarships. People in Canada lose their right to travel to the United States. Even young people, like recently here in Vancouver, there was a news story about a religious family on the North Shore or West Vancouver, I forget exactly where, but this young girl wanted to go volunteer to work with the homeless with a church group in the United States. And she couldn't go because at some point in her history, she was hanging out with some friends, a cop approached them, did not find marijuana, didn't arrest them, didn't charge them, but made a note that they had had an interaction because of a suspicion that marijuana was being used. That was like long ago for this girl in high school, and now she's graduated, she wants to help the homeless, and she can't because not even an arrest, not even a conviction, but because of an interaction where marijuana was kind of an issue and wasn't even actually found. So she was unable to go to the US. A lot of people are unable to travel. A lot of people can't get jobs. And if you do get a job, oftentimes they're going to want you to pee in a cup because they want to know if you're using marijuana. Cocaine and other drugs will disappear pretty quick in your system. So the drug testing out in the oil fields and all that, it won't really catch those who are engaging in hard drugs. Not that there's a problem if they're using drugs in their own time, it doesn't impact their work, whatever, have at it. But the drug testing industry, which continues to grow and expand in a lot of different fields, but beyond actual workers dealing with dangerous machinery, the drug testing industry is growing, and it's not looking for people who are doing a poor job. It's not looking for people who are dangerous. It's looking for people who choose to consume a substance in their own time, and then choosing to punish them and deprive them of their ability to feed their families and pay their rent and contribute to society because of something they do in their own time. There's nothing like that for alcohol. They aren't going around and finding people who drink and telling them that they can't work. If you're drunk on the job, you're probably going to get in trouble. If you show up to work totally blitzed out on brownies, you probably should not be doing that, and you might get in trouble too. But if you use marijuana in your own personal time, you shouldn't be made to suffer for that. But we've seen other ways that people pay the price for marijuana prohibition, in terms of not just losing their jobs, but forever being ostracized. Maybe nowadays we're seeing a shift, so more and more people are comfortable with pot, but even as recently as 5 years ago, if you came out and said you used marijuana, or you came to a pot rally, or you wrote a letter to a newspaper saying it should be legal, you might have somebody call you into their office and say, listen, you can't do that. You're making us look bad. So you have to be quiet in the closet if you want to use marijuana, because people might start, thinking that you're a certain type of bad person. Even though everybody knows someone who smokes pot, including professionals like Ted Turner and Richard Branson and Obama himself and Justin Trudeau, pot smokers, all of them. And great musicians and performers and people who brought us Apple, these people all use pot. But marijuana continues to be a stigma that results in people losing a lot of their liberty and their lives. People lose their kids because of cannabis. People have had their children taken away because there are plants growing in a house. And even if it's being done safely, these children are being taken away. Parents who are being tested positive for marijuana after they give birth, if a mother uses marijuana for nausea, they take kids away. This happened just the other day in the US. It's happening all the time. You have not just the restrictions for people to travel, but even driving. We're starting to see a lot of questions about driving under the influence and whether we should punish people for that. And people in Washington State who use marijuana are very concerned about losing their ability to drive, which can take away their ability to work and engage in society because of marijuana and their decision to use it. We're also seeing people lose their houses through asset forfeiture. Asset forfeiture is incredibly unjust. It's incredibly despicable, in my opinion, that they create a government group, an agency that is funded by the stealing of citizens' property. And it's not even taking property from people convicted of a crime. People who have been accused of growing marijuana have to prove that they bought everything without illegal proceeds. And if they can't, they can lose their home without even being charged and convicted and found guilty. That's happening in British Columbia. That is a gross injustice, because marijuana is not dangerous. And the fact that these agencies and these civil asset forfeiture offices are being funded by seizing property, it's just going to continue to look for more and more people to take from. And if you said you're going to take away property from everybody convicted of drunk driving, can you imagine the outrage? It goes so deep, the way that people's rights are violated. And beyond even, say you don't smoke pot, you don't know anybody who does, you've never had to pay a price in any way, shape, or form, but you have, in your tax dollars. How many people are upset about the rising tax rates, rising fees for MSPs and BC Highway, everything, the taxes just keep piling up. Well, that money is being used for policing and law enforcement. And if you move beyond pot, did you know that 75% of federal court resources and time in this country, of Canada, 75% is spent on drug cases. And the majority of drug cases is marijuana related. Marijuana grow-outs, marijuana distribution, trafficking. That's a lot of money being wasted. A lot of our tax dollars being wasted and abused and misused. And yet they dare come and ask for even more tax money to pay for the things we aren't getting, like appropriate health care and actual choices. That to me is offensive, because even if you want all the pot people to be punished, do you really want to see your tax dollars being used to do so when you're waiting months and months just to get a scan to make sure that you're not dying? I mean, there are a lot of parts of our society that are suffering for lack of funds, lack of attention, and marijuana prohibition is sucking away valuable tax dollars that should be used for much more important issues. And as a side note, marijuana is a safe substance that's helping save people's lives and can reduce the cost to society through alcohol abuse, prescription pain pills, and a lot of the harmful things going on in society. So marijuana, if it were legal, could actually save us tax dollars in terms of healthcare costs and the loss of jobs and employment from other things that are more addictive and harmful. One of the other dangerous things that marijuana prohibition has done is allowed police to violate our civil liberties and privacy. Police are able to spy on cell phones and set up surveillance without the same sort of rules that would apply for other cases. Some of the most disgusting things I've heard about marijuana prohibition out of the United States, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen in Canada, are instances where a driver does not stop completely at a stop sign. cop pulls them over, suspects them of marijuana, doesn't find any marijuana, but forces these citizens to be searched in their anus and their vagina for marijuana on the roadside. This has happened. This has happened where citizens are pulled out of their vehicles and sexually assaulted to search for marijuana, which isn't even found, it doesn't even exist at the site of the scene of the crime. That stuff happens, and it's a disgusting abuse of police powers, and it goes to make citizens lose their trust and faith in authority. And that's what happened to me when I started realizing I'd been lied to. You know, I have an aunt and uncle in Alberta, RCMP officers. My mother's father was RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. But suddenly I didn't trust police. And when you realize that they're being forced to carry out the enforcement of something so unjust, it makes you not really willing to go to them for help in other ways. So marijuana prohibition has actually helped erode the public trust in police. And that's dangerous for everybody because it creates a gap of them versus us. And police have killed people over marijuana. People have been shot and killed, and shot and injured, and had their pets shot by cops and murdered right in front of them. And that's because of marijuana prohibition. I can go on and on about how people, you know, their criminal record haunts them forever. And we're moving into a period of time where legalization is happening, and you know, down in the U.S., you know, if you want to go for a guy right across Washington State border, you can see Mount Baker. You can see land where people can be smoking pot legally, while here in Canada, you can be arrested and punished severely in ways that will violate your liberties for a long time to come. And so, while we move forward with exciting times and exciting changes and more freedom for a lot of people, I am here to be like, you know, kind of like, you guys, it's not so good because bad things are still happening. And we need to remember that there are people who have paid the price and are still paying the price for violating the laws of marijuana prohibition. There are people in prison today whose kids are visiting them today. And when I was visiting the US down in Mississippi and in Georgia, I was visiting my husband, Mark Emery, in those federal prisons. And I was privileged and lucky enough to have a business and a support base to let me go see him. But when I was down there, you know, I would visit with families with little kids who were going to see their dad. Their dad was there because he smuggled pot. And seeing these children showing up, going through metal detectors, watching their mom get pat down, you know, going to these big metal sliding doors with barbed wire all around. And it's not a nice environment. And to look at these children and say, wow, these ones are the lucky ones. These kids are lucky because they actually get to see their dad. You know, these are the children who are able to at least go and hug their dad. Many children, when they go visit their parents in prison, they're for pot or drug violations of some kind. Some of them have to go through a screen or a glass wall. Many other ones are done through video conferencing. I had to do a video visit in Seattle with Mark one time, and it's horrible. You don't actually make eye contact because you're looking up at the camera or looking at the screen, and it's not them, they're looking at it. It's tearing apart families is what I'm getting at here. And when I see these little children trying so hard not to cry when they say goodbye, and seeing their mother weeping, and these little 5-year-old kids being like, Mommy, don't cry, and they're trying not to cry. I'm like, wow, these are the lucky ones, because they get to see their dad. Many other children will not see their parents. And that creates a terrible cycle in the Black community and white community and in every community of children without parents. And these children are more likely to have interactions with police and the criminal justice system because their parents were taken away. So when I look at those kids and the stats, they tell prisoners that 70% of kids who have a parent in prison, they're going to be in prison or in handcuffs themselves. It's really depressing to look at those kids in that visiting room and think, one day you're going to be in here. Because they put your dad in here, because they didn't allow him to pay his debts to society in whatever other way. That's creating a new generation of lesser citizens who won't have the same rights and abilities because they'll be criminalized. And that's why prohibition needs to end, and not just marijuana prohibition, but all drug prohibition. And it's nice to see in the United States right now, Obama, for all his flaws or benefits or whatever, He's just a guy, he's a leader of a country, but he's actually doing things that make me happy, like letting 6,000 federal inmates out of prison for nonviolent drug crimes. Little steps like that, little things like that, little things like telling the DEA to back off from states that have legalized marijuana or medical marijuana, you know, allowing veterans to use medical marijuana for PTSD, allowing pharmaceutical companies to explore the anti-tumor properties of cannabinoids. There's so much information, so much going on out there. We're seeing a rapid move towards more accepting policies towards marijuana. But as we move forward, we need to remember there are still people who have paid the ultimate price. There are still hundreds of thousands of people behind bars. There are still communities that have been torn apart by having families separated because of marijuana prohibition. And when we move forward into coming up with new policies about marijuana, and it is exciting as an activist that I don't have to be in the street with a sign anymore saying prohibition funds organized crime. Like, people get it now after all these years of activism and marching in the streets and protesting and debating. Everyone's pretty much on board. Is anyone here against legalization? Maybe you are. I'm not going to hate them for it. See, it's a gift, right? That's as much as we're getting these days. There used to be a time where it was like, you want it legal? Oh my goodness, why? But now people are more in favor because it's not so much about, oh, I want it legal so we can all buy it and smoke it and have it. It's because we know that prohibition as a policy is not working. And when we heard the speakers talking with strange bedfellows, and for me it's been fun because in my activism career, it is mostly left-wing type people, I guess you could call them. I hate that left-wing thing anyway. It's more like a big circle where communism and fascism kind of tie up at the top. But you know, it's when you have these lefty types and then your righty types, a lot of activists would say to me, Jodie, don't go on Sun News. That's like Fox News North. You know, don't go talk to the conservative groups or whatever. You know, those people are like extremists. And I said, why would you turn down the opportunity to speak to any audience? Why would you ever turn down the opportunity to speak to people who agree and disagree with you to try and get them thinking about different ideas? I mean, it worked for me. Otherwise, I'd be standing here saying authority and keep it illegal like I did in high school. But I was able to change my mind through education, and because I've heard enough arguments and discussions about it that I was able to change positions. So that's why I don't, you know, cast out anyone who doesn't agree with me. I went on Sun News year after year before they got shut down, unfortunately, but Sun News, or Fox News North, they call it, had me on a lot. And I spoke to that audience because I knew that they were receptive, because when it comes to liberty and government and big government and taxation and excessive regulation and all that, I knew that the right wing would be on our side. And we're seeing a lot more of that in the United States. We're seeing bipartisan efforts to end prohibition, because even the right-wing pro-life groups, of which I wouldn't identify with myself personally, but I went to Dallas, Florida, and I spoke at a conference, and there were Republicans against marijuana prohibition, RAM. And they spoke about how being pro-life meant being pro-life after birth, about being pro-life for those kids whose parents are put away, about being pro-life for those children who suffer epilepsy, who are clearly having their lives improved by marijuana medicine. I mean, this is where the right wing decided to come on board. They said, yeah, you know what, big government is bad, and marijuana prohibition and the drug war is very much a big government. And like I said before, they've used marijuana prohibition and the drug war to justify the paramilitarization of police groups. That they have these SWAT raids going on every single day over marijuana. And that continues this massive encroachment of the creeping jackboots, my husband once said. You know, this authoritarian state of controlling you has been growing thanks to marijuana prohibition and the drug war, the ability to spy on people and to justify that sort of intrusion. Marijuana prohibition and the drug war have been very useful for authoritarians and for oppressors. And you see it in countries overseas where they continue to have national days. There's a day around the world where countries execute gun smugglers. They have a big public celebration, people come out, and they kill them. And that's celebrated. And meanwhile, we have substances like alcohol and pharmaceutical drugs and tobacco and sugar and fatty food. There's a lot of things out there that are dangerous. And I would often say to people, well, even if you don't think marijuana is safe, even if you think marijuana is deadly dangerous, how is the law making it safer? How does making it illegal make it safe? It doesn't. It allows teenagers to buy it from their friends, it puts gardens into basements, and allows organized crime to profit off of the product. They don't care what it is. If dandelions were illegal, they would move into that. But marijuana is illegal, and that's profitable. Prohibition creates inflated prices. Prohibition created the drug problem, the drug war problem. And politicians who support prohibition are supporting organized crime. That's one of my first slogans I had in a protest against Harper years ago, and it got around there a lot until some Workers United of the World, a socialist group, took my photo and put their own message on the sign, and people are like, what? That's not right. Jodie Emery would never say that. You know, like, I'm like, wow, I've become a meme for left-wingers, socialist groups. I think it was like when somebody says they get rich off of hard work, ask them to lose. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting concept, probably the hard workers. But anyway, I digress. But when it comes to marijuana prohibition, everybody's on board that it's a failed policy. But the question now is what kind of legalization system will we have? And one of my biggest concerns, even though I did join the Liberal Party because they support legalization, I did seek the nomination, and I sure helped Trudeau's feet to the fire, and I gave him a lot of talking points through my media about why marijuana is not what you should be afraid of. But during all that campaigning, I wanted to emphasize, and I still emphasize, that freedom of choice is tantamount. When we move to legalize marijuana, it cannot be moved into a monopolized system where the competition is criminalized through excessive regulation. I'm all in favor of licensed providers growing massive amounts of medical marijuana and sending it to patients, but not if they're going to do it by shutting down the dispensaries. I'm in favor of everybody having an opportunity to participate, because a true free market, which marijuana could hopefully demonstrate to people what a true free market is, it's where the market of supply and demand will dictate how much there is. Right now we have 200 dispensaries in Vancouver. Well, it's not because nobody wants them. Clearly there's enough demand to supply for 200 dispensaries, and there's even more demand. But when we move into legalization, we're going to see a lot of calls for monopolies, for specialized controls, for particular groups getting an advantage over the other. But my job in the years ahead is no longer to say, here's why we need to legalize it. It's going to be, here's why we need to legalize with as few restrictions as possible. Washington State's negative example is that they put in the taxes are too high, it's government controlled, the DUI, the driving restrictions are not scientifically valid, and they admitted it, they only included them to get the vote support. And I was a member of that campaign. I did work to pass that law, even though I knew it wasn't perfect. Because you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You can't be waiting until we can reach the promised land of liberty for all. I guarantee you women did not say, we'll just wait for the right to vote until we get full equal pay or whatever, right? You know, you didn't have the anti-slavery movement saying, we'll just keep that in place until black man's in the White House. You know, that did not happen because everybody knows justice and liberty, those are battles that are incrementally fought. Even today, people are still fighting for the alcohol and beer laws and all of that to change. It's not illegal, alcohol is not illegal, but the rules vary place by place, and there's always an effort to try and change them. So Ron Paul, back to him, one of my first heroes, he inspired me. I don't know everything he believes in, but he inspired me because he spoke truth to power, he was genuine and authentic, and he said there are 3 ways to make a difference. 1 is education, 2, political action or engagement, and 3, peaceful civil disobedience, where you accept the consequences. And I've done as much as I can on all those fronts to try and make a difference. And we're finally seeing more and more people come on board about legalization, but I hope they'll also realize in time that liberty and legalization can go hand in hand and demonstrate how we can be free from government oppression and free from restrictive controls and have an actual market of marijuana that provides for this demand that exists. And hopefully we'll be able to have the best form of legalization possible. And it's a good first step to stop arresting people. I'll take that, and then take what you can get and always ask for more. Thanks so much for
Please talk about the licensing and some of the issues that you're facing with your dispensary, and what some of the things that you're anxious about are. I'd like to learn more about those.
Well, actually, we don't run a dispensary. A quick brief of history. My husband, Mark Emery, started in London, Ontario. He fought against the Sunday shopping laws, banning shopping on Sundays. He fought against censorship laws by bringing in High Times magazine, which was illegal, and rap music by Two Live Crew. He went to court over allowing to have vulgar rap music sold in Canada. So my husband has always used peaceful civil disobedience, opening his bookstore on Sunday and selling these illegal books and magazines and publishing his own magazine called The Censorship Alert, where he wrote about censorship. So Mark started selling marijuana seeds in 1994 here in Vancouver because he realized that every movement needs money and marijuana seeds were in demand, and he would sell them and use the money raised to fund peaceful activism, ballot initiatives, political parties, and media. He raised and spent millions of dollars. He gave it all away, and the U.S. government came into Canada on July 29, 2005, and had Mark and two of his comrades who were arrested, not comrades, where are we? Two of his associates were arrested for marijuana seed selling, and they were facing 30 years to life in U.S. prison, even though none of them had even gone to the United States. They had been in Canada, their actions happened in Canada, but the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration said in their press release it was because Mark was using money to finance legalization lobbyists, and he used all sorts of puns like their pot of money has gone up in smoke and all that. So the DEA is, I'm feeling pretty smug these days because they said it was a significant blow to legalization, and it hasn't been. But Mark used his business as a place to smoke marijuana, which is breaking the law, to sell books and magazines about marijuana, which is technically still illegal in Canada. It never got resolved. It was dealt with in Ontario, but didn't, no precedent has been set. So if you have anything written about marijuana on you, that's technically still a crime. And paraphernalia laws, bongs, pipes, vaporizers, those are also still illegal. So our store is a head shop where you can come and buy your hippie tie-dye stuff. Also your more sophisticated things like vaporizers and all that. But since 2005, with me having to go to the US and visiting him in prison, we never sold seeds after that, never sold weed. And to watch all these dispensaries flourish in the time that Mark was in the US and until he got released last year, it's almost intimidating because it has actually impacted our business. Being a martyr does not make money. So like being a head shop is like being a candle shop in the modern age. People are going to go to the lamp store instead. People are going to dispensaries instead. But what we do in our business, if you want to check it out and engage in some peaceful civil disobedience, we run the Cannabis Culture Vapor Lounge, which is actually violating the anti-smoking bylaws, but I don't care. We can challenge that. People are consenting to come to our place. They're consenting and choosing to work in our place and to use marijuana in a safe environment. So the Cannabis Culture Lounge is at Hastings and Cambie. Mark has been there for 20 years doing activism out of that building. And we continue to run in elections and campaign. I run with the BC Green Party twice, the BC Marijuana Party twice before that. And tried to go with the Liberals, but they kind of want their people. Not to say I didn't have an impact, but in terms of civil disobedience, we are still doing that. We don't sell marijuana. I was going to go for the dispensary regulations or go try to be a dispensary, but when I started looking at the rules, they're completely unfair. They're completely unjustified. This $30,000 fee is insane when you compare it to other businesses. Even pharmacies pay far less than that. So we have work to do with the dispensary regulations here in Vancouver, but like I said, strange bedfellows, I am going to give credit to the City Council and City Hall in Vancouver for putting forward regulations because it's similar to Washington State. It's not perfect, but it's kind of like the bigger message. Most people there, when they hear Washington and Colorado legalized it together, that was far more powerful than just one-off Colorado. We needed two. And when you get to the nitty-gritty details, yeah, it's kind of crummy, but the overall message is great. And Vancouver City Council, even though the dispensary regulations in the specifics are unfair, the message overall that has been sent to the rest of Canada is that marijuana is here to stay. You've got to deal with it. Obviously, it's safe, but it's in demand. So other cities are looking to do their own regulations in better ways as well. The bad model can set a good example for better models elsewhere.
Hi. My question is, things are changing very quickly, I guess, through the coming in. Do you have
any idea how long it's going to take before we see any of that start to happen on the national level?
Well, I'm kind of excited about the year ahead. So Trudeau did promise to legalize it. And I do believe he's going to go through with his promise, not because he smokes pot, which he does, and not because the Liberal Party or any party is known for keeping their promises, because they're not, but because it's where the world is going. And as we're seeing with the move towards organic food and local, authentic, that's not the government saying, hey, consumers, demand businesses provide you with green, natural, healthy stuff. No, that's the consumer deciding, and the businesses responding, which I love to see. So legalization is similar. It's just people want it. They really, really want it. And legalization is something you can see immediately. That's why it's so popular. It's because you can vote about healthcare or climate change or whatever issues are important to you, but you know you're not really going to see that happen. Marijuana legalization, you can see it that day in Washington, that day in Colorado, the arrests stopped. The people who wanted to sell it were allowed to go and do it. So many changes happened immediate, they're concrete. The savings in enforcement was incredible. The amount of money they're spending on schools and healthcare and generating jobs and revenue, it's there. You can't deny that. It's factual, and that's why people are excited about legalization, because it can happen now and you can see it. But here in Canada, it's an interesting thing that we've got with legalization, because the United Nations, of course, there's a UN single convention on narcotics, I forget exactly what it's called, but basically you're not allowed to legalize it as a country. So that's going to cause a bit of a problem for Trudeau. But of all great, wonderful ironies, April 20th, 420, if that means anything to you, the United Nations General Assembly is meeting in New York. And one of the topics is going to be ending the drug war around the world. And a lot of nations are coming together. There's a report that's already been put out there, a preliminary report by the United Nations University. They have this analysis saying marijuana prohibition and the drug war has failed, what next? So we're gonna have Trudeau come in January, well, December, but starting the new year, exciting things happening with a lot of talk about the nitty-gritty details, where the devil hides, you know, the devil's in the details. But we're going to also have the world's eyes on us, and they are. The United States and everyone else is watching Canada. How are you going to legalize it? Everyone knows about Amsterdam, which isn't legal. Everyone knows about Uruguay, which is, and they're very different models, but Canada's going to set the model. And I think it's unavoidable, and it will happen because you have this massive reform happening in the United States. You've got Obama ready to leave. It's his last year ahead. He's doing some pretty ambitious stuff related to African Americans in jails and the drug war and all that. So I think the year ahead, we're going to see a massive change on the global stage when it comes to pot. I believe Trudeau will legalize it. I think that the details are going to have to settle out in the middle of the year, probably summertime. We're going to see. I can't give you an exact date, but I guarantee you in the year ahead, significant change is going to happen, because the United States will have to deal with Canada legalizing it. Their president, whoever it may be, is going to have to deal with a nation with a shared border producing and selling marijuana legally. And that, if you didn't hear, Mexico just had a Supreme Court decision where they're allowing citizens to provide, sell, grow marijuana, paving the way for legalization in Mexico, and the president of Mexico just said he was going to go forward and they're going to change the law. So now you have Trudeau up north, you have Mexico, and you have the United States, and they're all saying legalization is inevitable, let's do it. But again, it's about the details and the how. And it's okay that we're going to have different models of legalization, because again, it's like let the best one win. Let's see if the dry counties can do well, or if the weed crazy cities do well. And I guarantee you, marijuana legalization equals job creation, not only in growing and producing and selling pot, but in the transportation, advertising, management. Think of the craft beer industry. That's exploding. Why can't we do the same? Or even the coffee. There's coffee shops of every kind in Vancouver. There's enough room for everybody. But it's going to take some lobbying and efforts on behalf of activists to make sure that it's not too restrictive, because the government is about power. They are about control. And they'd like to control this industry, but it doesn't need control. It's been doing perfectly fine, but for the prohibition, and it'd be nice to come out of the shadows.
There's coffee outside, so.
And I'll thank you. That the last question you said? Yes. Okay, so we'll chat afterwards. Sorry.
Awesome. Oh, of course. Awesome. I like was almost tearing up. Oh, really?
No,
Yeah, but I mean,
what's happening now?
I'm on the FBI watch list.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have a record, but I'm on the watch list, which I think is way worse. I'd rather be charged than arguing to be. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Oh, appreciate it.
Oh no, that was on the live stream.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm still trying to find them. You have 5 years. Okay, work with that.
Yeah, it's.
Yes. I don't know the exact number.
So composition. Is that okay?
Yeah, well, I
It was
No, actually,
Oh. I had started and I decided to transfer it.
yeah.
That's how a lot of libertarians think about a lot of issues. These past drugs.
You're just gonna just.
Then people, do that.
Yeah. Too anal retentive.
Oh, that's the other thing. Oh, that's the. I can put things for you.
I know enough libertarians in Canada to take any conclusive remarks. Although I have noticed that a lot of Canadian libertarians support in the US, I find that while a majority of libertarians support Republicans, that there's still a lot of discourse. There are American libertarians trying to be all over the place. So they Democrats right now, libertarian all that has more
There's when you were, I was in the conversation. You find that weird.
I find that common
more although there are still some other why do you I feel that nowadays libertarianism has a more academic feel to it. So I never have one. So in order to immerse themselves into situations that force them to.
So flowery.
Yes. A lot of them call for a little discussion. Personally, I do think intervention is necessary, but we still have to be careful of that. So, I have a double major. I am studying psychology. Yes. I am here.
I like your shoes, Katrina.
Thank you.
Very nice. Yes. Yes.
She's not very attentive.
It's okay, she had me.
Yeah, that's why I love
Yeah,
well, we have to
which is ironic. Tim, it's yeah, it's a. It's not a bad thing, especially if you go into it.
I used to say that.
I didn't vote. No, well, eventually the word is it's called the minor ballots. And so we walk in and we say, I can get right back to them. And they have to register that this person actually has been voted. That's spoiling your ballot. And so you're just, so technically we don't have any voting. Or, I'm sorry. Yeah. And so it's literally a waste of money. It's the only people that should track it are the people that hold the yeah, this person is here and we've got this valve from this quote. Yeah, exactly. Just the ability to pick like the right pieces in. But yeah, so no, in my constituency, she went so you know, I think for some of the tested writing, yeah. We always yeah, at the end, but I actually and so he and I figured that. Well, your party's not the party I want to vote for. You just got four hours here. This is not beneficial. And they were just, yeah, they should have leadership review. New leader. If you look at the number of law records, he's and he's
They want to crash the conference to get on live stream. What?
Yep. But then, look at what you and so,
Yeah, not too good. The map is for something else.
yeah. Why?
I'll give a GPS at 2.0.
You're fine.
1 second. I can go, I can ship them over, but that takes a long time.
Yeah, I'm good on the good sleep, but I'm just like not. I think it's more and I don't know, I've been sort of frustrated with my being and it's always everything around and articles because like, you know, like said or something. And
What school you go to? What school?
I go to a community college.
So it's more like that.
Yeah.
Same thing.
But once I transfer, I want to go over to versus, and hopefully, you know, next year I'll actually be able to. How do you feel participate in the campus coordinator program in Washington D.C. And so last year they were having that at the same time as I was getting married. And, you know, I every time this is yeah, I'm like, yeah, I'm getting married this week.
Yeah. I got married.
Yeah. I don't think Aaron would have taken that.
That'd be pretty funny, actually.
Oh my God. It would not be funny. It would be terrible. Yeah, she's more fond of anarchists. But she's not. She's more naturally an anarchist than I am. She's like, what the fuck? You're telling me what to do? Go the fuck away. You can't tell me what to do. And I'm like, this is the theory that makes sense. And she's like, who cares? They're telling me what to do.
Well, and that's why I was
Yeah, there's a very good story. There's two good ones that just do that.
Yeah.
This whole,
It's cheaper.
You actually need to
Yeah, like her and my relationship, how it's affected me is I came to this revelation of really what I am is an anti-control freak. Yeah. Like that's what it is. I'm an anti-control freak. People are trying to be control freaks over other people's lives. Back off! Don't be a fucking control freak, right? And it's much more grounded than this idealistic philosophy. And I have a big philosophy I can back that up. But she inspired that, and for her, I've given her some insight.
Hey man, what's your take on
President Washington State of Society. Washington Students of the State of Society. I'm president.
If I get it wrong, just up there.
You can say the or.
No, I know what students are saying.
Yeah. I was just gonna say you can say anti-control.
That's a control freak.
Yeah. It just sums it up. Larkin Rose?
I do know that.
So Larkin Rose wrote a book called The Most Dangerous Superstition. It's a libertarian book that goes through the logic. And he's actually has a project where he's sending an open letter to a couple hundred philosophy professors, heads of the philosophy departments, saying, can you answer these questions that make government that make government happen? So can you delegate it right now? You don't have science. And can I agree with people that they can have and so on and so forth. That whole purely philosophical argument. But he he's just like sociopathic control freaks. Yes. I mean, she's not so. And she's not a big personality. She's an introvert, but if somebody's telling me what to do, she might be but then she gets out of it. As soon as she's in a comfortable she wants to be an business owner, something that I could in my face. I can't do. I get tired of being Liberty activist. And people who show up and fire just a couple. Really,
That's okay. I think this is actually we have if I go, that's a thing. I still like pretty much
All right, so this is going to be our last formal speaker talk of the day. So I know a few of you here are American, and believe it or not, yes, Canada has a constitution too. We're just not obnoxious about it. As you're saying. Yeah, I think here especially is where we're going to get to the good stuff. I've been a libertarian for about 10 years, and the reason why it took me so long to get involved in organizing stuff like this is because my head was just buried in books all the time. I tried going out to different events, but I was 14 at the time. I went to like bars and no one really took me seriously. So yeah, books were my thing, and I saw in some of the slides, there was stuff about like yes, mill and stuff like that. I was all about that stuff. I got a quote tattooed on my arm. So this is the reason why I picked Derek Crown as a keynote. His job description is that he defends civil liberties. Like, what's more noble than that? And so I'd like to invite Joseph up to the stage. He's the president of the Whatcom Students for Stateless Society Club in Bellingham, Washington.
Thank you. So I just met Derek during the break, and he revealed to me that the Canadian Constitution Foundation is, let's say, a partner organization with the Institute for Justice in the States. And I consider that to be a heroic work. And so I want to say that definitely the worthy keynote speaker. Derek Fromm is a lawyer practicing constitutional law in Calgary. He graduated with a degree in law from the University of Western Ontario and earned a degree in philosophy from the University of Waterloo and religious studies from Briarcrest College. His law practice is focused on advancing personal freedom and economic freedom by protecting the individual liberties from the encroachment of government. Please welcome Derek Fromm.
Just that close to the front. Okay, well, I kind of feel like whenever I give this talk, and it's a little bit different this time because there's some things that are more exciting than normal. Well, I shouldn't say that. But whenever I give this talk, I feel like I'm such a downer. I'm like coming with the storm cloud on the rain and parade. It was kind of funny because when I got here this morning, I noticed the Fraser Institute table set up, and they have their new Freedom Index for this year set out. And I wrote an article or a paper in their 2013 Freedom Index about the right to liberty in Canada. And I did some media after that, and it was kind of funny because the media would pick up the report and, oh, Canada's pretty good. I think we're ranked, that year, 7th in the world, we're doing great. And then they get to my paper, like, one of these things is not like the other because this Fromm guy is so negative. So I kind of feel like I'm out of step, and especially following after Jodie, she's so excited and she has great news for you, things are changing. Well, we've got a long ways to go in my opinion. So I don't want to make everyone, I'm just going to move this down, sorry, here it says. Don't want to make everyone too disappointed because I think I do have some ideas about how we can do to improve things. So yeah, as was mentioned, I staff lawyer. It's kind of funny. There's only one of us who's called a staff lawyer, that's me, so. There's a litigation director and there's an executive director. We're all lawyers and they couldn't figure out something for me, so they threw the back on this. So, is there a charter right to liberty? Kind of a leading question. I've met quite a few of you folks today who are American and welcome here to Canada. And you may be thinking, isn't that an odd question? Because it's America has a very strong tradition of liberty, but what about Canada? Well, let's delve into this a bit. So here's J.S. Mill. The classic liberal philosopher, J.S. Mill, said of liberty, the only liberty which deserves the name, he actually said freedom, I consider them synonymous. The only liberty which deserves the name is that of pursuing your own good in your own way, so long as we do not attempt to deprive others of theirs or impede their efforts to obtain it. Very important. Just leave that there and let you read that as I continue talking. So Mill's concept of liberty is powerful and robust. It protects negative freedom. Important, contrasting negative freedom with positive freedom, if you know those two. It protects the negative freedom of individuals, permitting them to be self-determining, free of state interference of any kind, unless it's to prevent harm to another. Unfortunately, this concept of liberty is almost completely foreign to the Canadian constitutional law jurisprudence. And our courts, at least currently, are out of step with the classical liberal philosophical foundations of our very own political system. In fact, the courts in Canada have eviscerated the concept of liberty. Okay, so they've eviscerated the concept of liberty. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms was adopted in 1982. The Charter is our Bill of Rights here in Canada. The Charter is a constitutional document that is the supreme law of Canada. It is the standard by which all of our other laws are measured. And most importantly, what it does is it limits the authority of government. It does this by prohibiting the government from enacting laws that violate individual freedoms without justification. That's important, without justification. So the government cannot violate your rights unless it can tell you why and satisfy the court. The Charter offers explicit protection for liberty. Section 7 reads, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. Kind of looks like casting spells. What does it mean? Well, a constitutional guarantee of liberty, if it's going to be consistent with J.S. Mills, should ensure that everyone has the right to pursue their own happiness, so long as their actions don't harm others. Seems to make sense. And such a constitutional guarantee would protect individuals from unjustified state interference with their chosen way of life. But there are many, many ways in which the courts in Canada have permitted the government to impede individual liberty. For example, the government can confiscate your property without any compensation. It can force you to have your photo taken, even if it conflicts with your deeply held religious beliefs. It can force parents to educate their children in a particular fashion. It can force individuals to pay union fees, even if you are not a union member. It can prohibit and punish you for putting something into your body. And it can prohibit you from entering into mutually agreeable contracts with other people. In each of these instances, the government may take these steps whether or not anyone is harmed. In fact, in some cases, both parties in the arrangement, mutually agreeable contracts, both parties might consider themselves to have been benefited. But the government has no hesitancy about arguing that its coercive actions further a public good, or that it's advancing your interests, whether you recognize them or not. Government acts of this type, in my opinion, are an affront to individual liberty. And if Section 7 of the Charter had a robust and meaningful guarantee of liberty, like Mills, each of these government acts would be constitutionally suspect. So under what circumstances do the courts recognize that the government has violated your liberty? So all these examples I gave you so far, the courts say, no, that's not liberty, the government can do it. Well, what are those few cases where the government has been prevented from violating your liberty? The Canadian courts have recognized that a restriction on individual liberty or an individual's freedom of movement engages Section 7. So if the government stops you from moving around, so that basically means prison. But liberty can protect more than this. In an early case, Glencoe, Chief Justice of the court, said, the liberty interest protected by Section 7 is no longer restricted to mere freedom of movement. Oh, well, that's a step in the right direction, right? Originally, liberty, well, you just can't be put in prison without a good justification. Well, this seems to mean that it's more than that. What can this be? Well, a while later, another justice on the court said, the liberty interest protected by Section 7 must be interpreted broadly and in accordance with the principles and values underlying the Charter as a whole, so that it protects an individual's personal autonomy. Well, that sounds very promising, doesn't it? That's great. We're going to have a broad right to liberty that protects your autonomy. Well, even though the courts have said that they're willing to interpret liberty broadly, they've been reluctant to do so. In fact, it's become a mantra for legal commentators and the courts to intone mindlessly that Section 7 does not include a number of things, including, what I think importantly, is business or economic-related liberty. Despite this, the Supreme Court of Canada has generally been careful not to close the door on interpretations of Section 7, which might include economic components. Now, here's a case, Irwin Toy. This is really funny. When I was in law school, I learned very early on that the Charter doesn't protect economic interests. Now, what would that be? What would liberty and economic interest be? It'd be like the right to earn an honest living and not have the government take away from you. Okay? So, if we don't have that in the Charter, what does liberty mean? Because as it stands now, according to this Irwin Toy or according to this other decisions, the government can actually take your livelihood away from you, not compensate you, and they haven't infringed your liberty somehow. Strange. Well, what did they say? They said, we do not at this moment choose to pronounce on whether economic rights fundamental to human life or survival are to be treated as the same as corporate commercial economic rights. So, what did they say? We do not at this moment choose to pronounce. Wait a second, so when I was in law school, I was told there are no economic rights in the Charter. The decision that all my teachers and every lawyer in this country will quote to you says, we do not at this moment choose to pronounce on whether economic rights. But yet, exactly the opposite has happened. The court, in this case, did not definitively conclude that economic rights, business rights, the right to earn an honest living, are not in the Charter. They did not say that. They went to great lengths not to say that. But everyone treats it as if they did. It's the most bizarre thing. There's an overwhelming tide of opinion that the Charter does not and should not protect economic liberty. And this tide includes none other than Professor Peter Hogg. Whereas if you are familiar with constitutional law, you'll know that Peter Hogg is actually the real Supreme Court of Canada. Because every Supreme Court of Canada decision on a contentious topic, they always say, well, Professor Hogg says, and then they defer to his opinion. So what does Professor Hogg say? He says, there are good reasons for caution in expanding the concept of liberty. But then when you actually read his text and his argument, he doesn't bother to supply any. Just another assertion. It's another mindless intoning of this mantra that the Charter does not contain economic liberty. So Mill's definition aside, J.S. Mill's definition aside, according to a wide variety of dictionaries, what does liberty mean? Well, it seems to have two major definitions. One is freedom of choice, and the second is the absence of external constraints. And to me, in the political realm, that seems to capture exactly what I would think liberty should be. So freedom of choice and an absence of external constraints. And so in the economic realm, liberty is often taken as the right to earn an honest living. So the definition of liberty was unencumbered by the courts when the Charter first became the law in Canada. So this provision in the Charter came into effect in 1982. This was JT's dad that brought this in, right? So at that point, it meant exactly what you see here. No courts had made any decisions on it, and there was no decisions defining what liberty might mean. At that point, the court could have just looked to the dictionary and said, what does liberty mean? But the very, very first decision, so 3 years after this was brought in, the very first decision on Section 7 liberty, this is what the court said. Indeed, all regulatory offenses, so things like not sufficiently licensing your vehicle, all regulatory offenses impose some restriction on liberty, broadly construed, but I think it would trivialize the Charter if we sweep all those offenses into Section 7 as violations of liberty. So, in other words, the very first court decision on this, the justice said, I really like the idea of the Charter, and I'm so dedicated to the Charter that I'm going to ignore what the word liberty means, because if everything's a violation of liberty, the Charter will become trivialized. That's problematic. More dedicated to the Charter than they are to liberty. In other words, this judge deliberately chose to curtail the plain, broad meaning of the word liberty. Instead of applying this justification for the government. Instead of making the government justify its laws and its infringements of your rights, what the court did is they just wrote it away. Well, when the government makes you do this and you don't want to, that's not a violation of your liberty. It's very patronizing. And the idea, again, was just, we have to have this charter, and we don't want to trivialize it. Very strange. So, as a result of this, the courts have been very reluctant to find violations of Section 7 and all sorts of things that would get caught by the dictionary's definition of liberty do not fall within the Charter's scope. For instance, this is just, it's so bizarre to me reading this. Liberty is not synonymous with unconstrained freedom. It does not include a right to transact business whenever one wishes. Yet, by any dictionary, that's exactly what it means. Exactly what it means. Mill would have it mean that. Likewise, the courts have found that liberty does not include the right to smoke marijuana for recreational purposes in the privacy of your own home, or even the right of a doctor to practice his profession. But you know what? It would have made a whole lot more sense if the court early on had said, you know what? These things are clear violations of liberty, and the government has to justify why it's taking it away from you. But you know what? They didn't. They didn't do it that way. Instead, they tightly circumscribed. They constrained liberty, wrote it down, made it tighter and smaller. But what they've done, instead of trivializing the charter, is they trivialized liberty. Which is worse? Some document from 1982 that a bunch of guys sat in a room to try to put together, to come to an agreement on, or your right to live as you want, provided you're not harming other people. So what remains of liberty now? Now that the courts have emptied it out, not much. And this is kind of sad, because by 1988, so if we're counting, this is only 5 years after the charter was adopted, liberty became to mean this: decisions of fundamental personal importance. That's it. Okay. So now, you might have to think about that one a bit. I'm sorry I don't have a slide for it, because when you think about how poor this is really poor. So this is the Morgenthaler decision from 1988. Thus, an aspect of the respect for human dignity upon which the Charter is founded is a right to make fundamental decisions without this interference from the state. This right is a critical component to the right to liberty. In my view, this right, properly construed, grants individuals a degree of autonomy when making decisions of fundamental personal importance. This is problematic. You have a degree of liberty. You have a degree of autonomy when you make those once-in-a-lifetime decisions that might come along, well, once in a lifetime. So what's the problem? Well, this does not protect us from those petty day-to-day violations of liberty that occur over and over. First, let's look at it this way. Here's problem number one. The dividing line between decisions of fundamental importance and one that is trivial is completely subjective. Why does legal permission to abort a fetus qualify as more important than that of a doctor to practice his profession? There's no scale, there's no units by which such things can be measured. And it's unlikely that two people would ever rank all the panoply of decisions in their life the same way. Secondly, it's absurd to think that all the minor violations of our liberty aggregated together do not amount to a full-blown state of totalitarianism. Suppose, for instance, that the state decided to prescribe what time in the morning we would get up, what color of clothes we could wear, how often we could go to the bathroom, or how many hours of television we could watch a day. Well, each of these rules, on its own, isn't a decision of fundamental personal importance. But yet, when considered all together, it amounts to complete totalitarianism, and the Charter will do nothing to protect you. It is not a liberty issue to the courts. Third, doesn't it seem logically backwards that we have all these liberal rules for these decisions that are once in a lifetime? So this decision is so important that you get to decide it. The government will get out of your way. Yet, at the same time, it's all those little decisions that are so unimportant, you don't get the choice to make. It's completely backwards. They've turned it on its head. And fourth, I can't take credit for this criticism, but who are these lawgivers with all their wisdom and intelligence to decide how we can live our lives, when they themselves were plebes, just like us, a short while ago? And now we can't be trusted to make decisions on our own, but they're wise enough to make them on our behalf. It's just very strange to me. If Mill is correct, and the only liberty that deserves its name is pursuing your own good in your own way, so long as you do not attempt to deprive others of it, it's hardly hyperbole to say that Canada does not contain the right to liberty. So hopefully I can go through this quick. So what's the solution? Oh, yeah, I did have a slide for that. I'm terrible. Okay, so what's the answer? So this is like what I picked up for a ship on Google, and I'm from the prairie, so the best I could do. I didn't. I had water. There's a ship. So here's an analogy. Let's say you're gonna get this ship and sail off from Halifax to Lisbon, Portugal, and you only have one chance to get there. So you have to aim your ship just perfectly. Okay, and you set off sailing. You can't do any course corrections. Well, let's say when you're making that initial steering decision, you're just off by a few degrees. You're like, well. But the problem is that mistakes over time in something like that become compounded, and you start to see problems, more and more problems. And that's what's happened here. We're way off course, and we need a massive mid-voyage heading correction. That's what I try to do for a living, by the way. And how did we get here? Well, the left, to use that, I really hate those left-right terms too also. The authoritarians, I'll just say that, I don't mean to insult the authoritarians in the room. The authoritarians were very early on in 1982 excited about the charter. It was a tool they could use to force the government to do things. So they got as many of their friends as they could appointed to law schools to teach. The second is on account of these positions in academia, they were able to seed the law journals with articles advancing their own particular point of view. And these journals, in turn, have become the experts and the expert journal articles used in constitutional law cases. And third, over time, more and more judges were the products of this type of law school environment. And as a result, Canada's jurisprudence has drifted further and further away from its classical liberal tradition. And now lastly, this is the one that I deal with very often, is that they mustered their forces and began to intervene in every constitutional case they could. And so they could affect the development of law in Canada. It was a very intentional process. And I think we can see it very clearly if you are familiar with, or you ever happen to read that 1985 case, Simpson, Sears, and O'Malley. It's a case about equality. And very early on, because it was that portion of the charter was actually brought in that year, and that case made the Supreme Court in that year. So what happened? When you read that case, you're like, oh, okay, bad decision, I disagree with it, it's not very good. But if you read between the lines, you'll see that, oh, there's all these other parties intervening. And an intervener is someone who has no real direct interest in it, but they say, hey, I have an expertise, I represent these certain people, this people group. This is an important constitutional case, we want to be heard. So the Supreme Court will allow you to intervene in the case so your voice can be heard. Well, the interveners lining up for that all supported the authoritarian agenda. And when you read the decision, one of the judges says, well, we're trying to figure out the facts here, and all the parties agree, and wait a second, all the parties have conceded what the facts are here. So even Simpson Sears, the evil authority, this corporation that was oppressing her worker, agreed. And so here we have a case that was seminal in Canadian law, where you have all these interveners on this side, the plaintiff is on that side, even the defendant is on that side. No wonder our law is so skewed. So this is what I suggest. This is why what you guys are doing is so important, and why you are so important, is we have to do the opposite. We have to take this word back, and this word has to mean what it's supposed to mean. And we have to do things like get an education. We have to become very good at handling the media. Get yourself out there, write articles, write the editor, have your voice heard.
You know, if you go to law school, don't get caught up in this whole thing of power-hungry lawyers. Go there and intentionally, you know, go with the idea that liberty should mean liberty. You should, if you're an academic in another field, take that with you where you go. It's going to be a long course correction. Ships are huge. We have 30 years right now, 30 years of charter jurisprudence that we have to overcome. And it's not easy because at this point, so many of the cases are considered unassailable. They cannot be overturned, but we've got to do it if liberty is to mean liberty in this country. Thank you. So I guess questions now, if anyone has any questions? Keep it easy. Don't like hard questions.
It's only a step.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think I have what will be a simple question, which is, you mentioned that there were all these authoritarian organizations that were intervening in these early charter cases. So can you name some of those organizations? What were the key organizations that were, advocating that sort of charter interpretation, and also who was behind them?
I don't know who was behind them necessarily, but one that's still around now is LEAF. At times, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association is that way, which is bizarrely named. Mostly human rights tribunals. They are very active, and I'll just say it, right? Any decision given by a human rights tribunal necessarily infringes property rights. Any remedy they offer has to steal from somebody to give it to another. So they intervene because they have a vested interest in the law being maintained in a certain way. I wrote about this in a few journals too, about how it's very interesting. There's a phenomenon in this country where the government often doesn't have an incentive to defend its own legislation, and the results are we end up with positive law. So we end up with the government having obligations to provide resources from one party to another. Fortunately, that hasn't happened. And let me just go back here. Fortunately, that hasn't happened here yet. Although the left, again, is very organized. The authoritarians, again, are very organized, trying to have positive rights written into the charter. And we posed an application made for a positive right to housing in Ontario recently. And it was an application made in court where about 10,000 pages of affidavit evidence from expert witnesses from around the world that Canada needs to have public housing for people. Because it's contrary to this provision unless we provide houses, public housing for people. And our friends in America know exactly what public housing results in. Ghettos, gangs, violence, bulldozers. It's inevitable. And yet we want to go down that road in Canada. So the left is very organized and very intentional. There's a lawyer in Toronto, Clayton Ruby, who is very active in pushing that side of things. The attack on Trinity Western University, for instance, which my organization has come out and said it's a freedom of contract issue. This is an economic right. Party X wants to buy services from Party Y. They should be permitted to do so unless they're doing something otherwise illegal. He's decided that he's going to support the other side in that they should not be allowed to have that mutually agreeable contract. So there's still the vestiges of that hanging around.
I'm going to ask you for free legal advice.
Oh, I can't do that.
More recently, my friend in Vancouver presented me with a contract.
Yeah.
The contract contains a clause that says they would like the opportunity to raise my rent by 150%. There's a law in the state that I live in that says landlords may not raise the rent more than 10% in a 12-month period. I wouldn't sign the contract. The landlord went berserk, threatened to seize my property, my possessions, negative threats. I couldn't prove that it happened over the phone. And my brother, who's also an attorney, said, they're allowed to do that. they're allowed to ask for any terms in a contract at all, even if it violates a law that's already been written. What do you?
I want to give legal advice, but I can speak very generally. I think that, okay, the way I analyze the problem is somebody has property and you want to rent it from them. It's their property, they have property rights in that, and you would like to receive a service. And if they have stipulations on your use of their property that you don't like, then maybe you should look elsewhere for services.
What about the law that says they're not allowed to raise my?
See, that's, yeah, I don't agree with rent control laws. I think that they're harmful and they interfere with the pricing in the marketplace. And that the marketplace should set prices, not the government. So I know it's not the answer you want to hear. I'm speaking generally, I don't know about your particular circumstances, but that would be my answer.
You don't think 150%, 15 times
No.
what the law allowed is not egregious?
No, I mean, you could go elsewhere, right? It's like when I walk into a grocery store and I want to buy a watermelon, and the watermelon's 150 times or 150% higher than it would be elsewhere. I can leave that store and go to another grocery store and buy a watermelon.
Even though there may be a law in effect that says.
And like I said, I disagree on a moral level with the government interfering in the pricing of goods like that, because I think it has negative consequences in the long run. Yeah. So, as a lawyer, no, they're not allowed to do that. But as someone who takes a normative view of the law, the government's law is most likely wrong.
I wonder what opinion you have on Bill C-51 because, again, like I'm not very well versed.
Okay, well, I'm not allowed to have an opinion, and that's kind of the honest truth. If I would say anything, and especially if this is being recorded broadcast, I'll be partisan and taking a position on something like that. And I work for a charity, and the CRA watches us, and we're not allowed to have opinions. Okay. So I will say very generally, like advising people about their rights. I've been very concerned about the expansion of a police state. And
I don't want to ask you about Bill C-51. I want to ask you about any attempts or whether it's legislation or just plain action that violates civil liberties in the name of preventative security.
Mm-hmm.
I know somebody famous said that if you choose security over liberty, you'll have neither. However, with again, maybe this is the product of fear mongering, but in a very post 9/11 world, I also do worry about something like that happening, and I don't think this is the thing. I don't think we'll ever be able to stop anybody doing harm because there's some, as we saw in Ottawa and Quebec, one crazy person could just go and screw up something. But what argument would you give the authoritarian side of politics for against preventative security?
Well, policy arguments, I think you've got a handle on it. Like from a policy point of view, if we give up our freedom to live as we want for the risk of something, then I think that should be done on a more individual basis than the state deciding first off. But everything we do has a measure of risk associated with it. From what I understand, it's still far more risky to drive in a car than it is to fly an airplane. And it's the most common way for a child to die. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old at home. The most common way for a child to die is when their parents drive them. And so there's risk there. I wonder how many children between 3 and 6 or whatever have died from terrorism in Canada. I don't know any. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I don't know the risks. Maybe Maybe they're being thwarted every moment and I don't realize it, I don't know. But I do know that two things from that driving the car with my kids is far more dangerous probably. But then the other thing that kind of makes me sad in all this is that we're so willing to give up our freedoms, which have a very tangible and obvious way to improve our lives. Like it's very obvious when you look at the Fraser Institute's Freedom Index, that the greater economic freedom people have, the greater their property rights, the more the courts are upholding their liberties against the encroachment of government and such. People get richer, do better, live happier lives. I mean, it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence when you fly a satellite over Koreas that one's dark at night and one isn't. I mean, it's economic freedom, it's liberty that does this. It makes people happy. So it's kind of scares me that the current, and I shouldn't say current, it's a long, politicians, they earn their bread and butter by making us scared of something. That's what they do. And it just seems like this is the issue right now, so it seems novel. But no, this is what they've always done. This is the way politics works. So it frightens me and makes me sad that people are so willing to get rid of the civil liberties, which work, make us rich and happy, and we have better lives, just for the risk that something bad might happen.
Sorry.
So, yeah, and so I don't think there's any good basis for it, but in Canadian constitutional law, I'm not sure there's much of an argument against it. Because we just don't have a tradition of liberty in this country. If you look at our constitution from the UK, where we inherited from, it divides up all power. Every legislative matter is divided up between the provinces and the federal government. There's no conceivable topic they couldn't legislate on. And if the courts, using the common law, were to stand up and say, no, you're infringing civil liberties, well, then the government can actually just enact a positive statute and take that civil liberty away from you. We have no barrier against that happening in this country, no tradition of liberty. So, we could end up in a police state, and it's just Canadians are generally unambitious. We haven't enacted these laws yet because we haven't gotten around to it yet. We probably won't. So maybe it's good we have Trudeau, right? Maybe he'll not do as much. Maybe not.
I've got one of your pamphlets here.
Okay.
It's a free country, and we work every day to keep it that way. But how can you say it's a free country when we know that that's not the case? It's far from being a free country. And there's governments routinely track on.
I feel like this is a gotcha question.
This thing is so vague. There's no point even writing it because it talks about liberty, but then they got their out right there, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. So they can, virtually anything, they can create a law that tramples on your rights in virtually any area if they want to, and they do. And otherwise, Jodie wouldn't have to be fighting for decades to try and get life.
Now I think this is going to harken back to, I think, 2 or 3 presentations ago when you were talking about democracy, and I agree with a lot of what you said. But democracy, I think we have a tendency to reduce it to just voting, and it's not just voting. It's other institutions as well. Democracy includes like free press, and our press is doing pretty well. I mean, they haven't been restrained very much. They might not always agree with them. They might be biased, yes. But I mean, if you know Ezra Levant at all or heard of him, I mean, who could tolerate that guy, right? Other than a free country. And the other thing, so we have voting rights, we have a free press.
I like Ezra.
I like Ezra too. Ezra was on the board of my organization before I was around. So we have a free press, we have voting rights. We also have an institution of the courts. The courts themselves, they're supposed to be backstopping us against having our rights infringed. They dropped the ball, yeah, they have. And they don't do a very good job at times, and we can disagree with them, but we still have an institution of courts where we can go make a claim, get our rights vindicated, and judges are impartial for the most part. There is corruption at times. But when we look around the world, we're doing a lot better than most of the world is. So we still do have a free country, but if you're going to demand perfect freedom, before the word free can be used, and I think you're never going to use the word. It should be struck from your vocabulary.
Well, it's so easy to get perfect freedom. All you have to do is just allow people to opt out. And what about voluntary consent?
Yeah, no, that's,
All boils down to voluntary
you're speaking to the choir. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, that'd be great, but, and you know, this is, I sometimes, sorry, I'm just gonna riff on that for a moment. I sometimes despair, honestly, because I go home and I complain to my wife and she's just shut up. and so that's, you know, got me involved in some things. I have gotten involved in politics recently because I think I'm tired of hearing myself complain. But then, you know, I stop and think, there was a point in time in this country didn't have the charter. And this country, you know, was very different than it was now. Society was different. Like, I may have made up a mythical past in my mind, but, you know, where the government was much smaller and people could make their way in the world. Was it perfect? No. But things can change. And it's just sometimes we feel claustrophobic in the now. We get stuck in the way things are right now. We don't have a longer view of it. And the Canada 40 years from now will be very different than Canada from right now. It will be. And we have to make sure we're the ones guiding the agenda. Because it will be different. And if we're asleep at the switch and we allow for 30 more years of charter jurisprudence to constrain us, then we're in a lot of trouble. But it doesn't have to be that way, because change is inevitable. And I don't think the type of change is inevitable.
So on that inspiring note, you know, hopefully not totally hopeless, let's thank Derek. So then another 15-minute break.
I could actually use that this morning. But a little bit late, leaving my house at 4 in the morning.
Sorry, I'm a little confused.
Oh, no, that's not good. Oh, no.
Can you write that?
Sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can vote. Yeah, and so, yeah.
He's right, but this is
licentiousness, where I have freedom. Now, are we talking about like existential freedom, like freedom like Neo, or are we talking freedom like I get to kill anybody I want, or like negative freedom?
Negative freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah, the risk is well, yeah, and you know, I guess.
And that is, I think it's something we have to accept. But, for example, communication, I'm not communication, like automatic grabbing of data and communication is a simple requirement. And what, I mean, I consider myself so what do you have to say is says, like myself, well, I'm just a whole person. I don't care if you read my text so long as you get the text that I'm close to me up.
Well, yeah. Now, I guess kind of implicit in that is that if you're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah, if I'm not doing anything wrong, I advise people going around.
Is that your actual? Or you just hypothesize again?
More or less, I guess.
Yeah, that's
what you're doing.
It does, yeah. It definitely, but the other thing is you can do it right. Here's an example. One of my organizations, he ran a business in Liberties. Are you from BC? Okay. His name's Emery. The last 20 years. He ran a business there, and it was basically like an RV Yeah, I heard this guy, so yeah. And he cut down all the trees in his farm and just had his bear and small trees. And so he sold the trees and because his business getting GST. Well, his accountants who were paying very generously. And so he's okay, a couple of years go by, his accountant then was working for them and initiates an audit of the road. So he initiated.
Not a conflict of interest at all.
No, in this, exactly, you're also already initiated an audit. It turns out you owe about 20 grand in GST. Yeah, exactly. And so then Irvin's crap, what's going on here? So the CRA came into his house, where he had all his books for his business. And he said, okay, I'm going to there's my stop. So he gets that. No, and so he gets back home and they've decided that they're going to take his money against his will. So he goes to Prince George and says, books back. Okay, well, oops, right. And so now they say he was he goes to court. He has to go to court. So he has to pay for a lawyer. Court finds out about a year. Court finds, oh, he didn't raise money. Actually, the government owed this. So they became a check for $7. In the meantime, all the businesses that said, this guy's here. Court for tax evasion, all his loans, put him out of business. So he went from a net worth of about $1 million to
no, I see what you mean. Even if they gave him, even if that $7 grand that should have been covered his legal costs, which he should have had to pay. And I just never understand why people hear, oh, this person's in debt to somebody else. Let me go and ask him if he has my money.
Yeah. But in this case, this guy,
and I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. It goes back to the broader principle, and there are some associated with life. And I do agree with that general principle. I guess this is maybe like the application that I feel is justified, and I know it's definitely because of media bias, but I do still have that. Like I will not be, even though it is a civil rights violation, and as long as we look at that, I'm fine with that having my data and reading it just in case.
do not use the door.
But that's not the same thing.
It is. It's actually better. Like leaving the door open is less invasive.
Well, I mean,
you may be committing crimes that you don't.
Yeah, with the penalty,
like the income tax act is a perfect example. Like,
it's impossible to act like,
what do you mean see it? Like I have to like step out.
It's a book about this thing. And it's that Emery paper. It's about 2,600 pages long. It's a tiny little thing you have to do.
If they go to that and arrest you for crimes that are related to like it's very slow.
It's more than that. They're actually doing it. There's a lot of which is why would you there's the other protection for it. Well, the courts stood up against that question. Yeah, no, it's so was another one. That's why the other one is the cyberbullying. The original cyberbullying law was called 15th century. It was called Protecting Children from Internet Predators. It changed the day. It's just pure horror. It's just pure horror. That it had nothing to do with predators. You could do a word search and the only place predator show up. It's just one type and the content. What it was is just random huge power sources, including real-time data. And protection of liability. So ISPs now have that obligation and you couldn't sue them. And see, the other thing is, I just don't trust government. I don't think that they, they're just, they're like you, and they're corrupt, who do bad things. And when you give them all this power, they have access to your information. What if somebody thinks he wants to screw you over? This doesn't happen. And you know, the government actually at this point knows what it does. The government in this country has no legal and civil law. All of negligence law is summed up by the reason here. So it came in the UK.
That means if they're they have to be, they have to observe certain things when they do it. But I would say that's what we need here.
Yeah, it would be. And they can't do it negligently. So like in the LaRue case, the guy who did the audit his own work, he was actually a drug addict. And he, in the course of this audit, he asked for a couple grants and then he later got his overdose. And so this audit was complete, just that it was a shakedown to get money. It was a shakedown to get money. The guy's like, this is one of these government officials. And he has a vested interest. This one this guy over. And the courts have said the government doesn't have anyone to do your government. It was completely negligent. If you did that to me, I could sue your ass. If you would
I agree with that. And that if like intelligence is gathering mass data to look for any crime, I think that's a different story. For conspiracy to do like
just to provide a further indication of it.
I'm not as
seems it's like this. There is a strong policy that means that.
Well, we get so many things given to us, so I can't call it.
It's just
I mean, realistically,
What's to do is more.
Yeah,
Oh, that's sweet. Oh, you must have put it so, yeah, I tried to do we're not always on the first page, but.
Yeah,
that's
yeah, let me see it.
I think you're also leaving out a possible case where, let's say they didn't have as much of a hate.
There's a good reason they can do this. I mean, it's just that's a reason it's good to and that's why we have judges. That's exactly the judge is supposed to have office is supposed to protect us from privacy, right? That's protecting us from external and as soon as we buy then we got a big fight. I mean that's undermining thousands of years of law. And to go burden we don't even have to apply the system. It just does. And if we get really progressive and throw it out, we're going to end up with a whole bunch of problems going on.
That's why I asked about secrecy one, because I think that's exactly what it does. And they set up, they were giving all these reasons about access, better access to it, but it establishes a different system. It establishes a different, a judge who would make those decisions. Yeah, but I mean, I belong to an environmental security now, but the group that it came out of is called Forest Alliance. I don't know if you know about them, but one is, well, there's this phrase in here that says, and prevents threats to the national economy. That apply to protesters on Liberties, and it turns out that CSIS spied on a whole bunch of environmental groups for a partisan. I mean, there's no way Literally, where you found, well, like, doesn't matter, there's no way in for this perfect model, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
That's like, that's interesting. They slide on that. You know, bunch of puppies, like, standing in the way of whatever, on where to be mounted. They slide on the course and these guys are, these groups are taking them to court. Well, they can't.
Exactly, so you know.
So I think that and I know what you're trying to say. It's if we go in favor of a certain application of a violation of liberty, it's a slippery slope, and it doesn't really give credence to the rest of it.
Yeah. I don't actually buy slippery slope articles myself. I'm more like, here's the example. If you allow okay, so, but you know, there's a real principle difference between someone saying, I'm a horrible people, I you don't want to do your life. There's a huge difference. So I don't buy this whole thing, but I just think that's wrong. And it's not because I think it's abstract. It's not that at all. It's because we just don't we just have to look around the world. And when places that have problems, it's like it just works better. Kids, they're large needs, it works better. And so when I see the government have more power than that to be able to bypass the workers in the that have government, so it seems like
It sounds extreme.
I still don't understand that. I understand exactly if you have to have they had intelligence about it.
And you know, they didn't have, I mean, how do you play devil's advocate against myself? We still.
That's my parents say.
Oh, you're right.
That's the distinction use of force. Like rape is you're using force. It's not voluntary. That's yeah.
And so sometimes just extremely just because one is so bad.
It's a gateway drug. It's
So then I say make it very making alcohol
I think it's because it's a social norm. I think at this point, like alcohol is once very long, it's one more social norm, and then people decide.
Yeah.
They're not engaging in we are going to give more.
It's almost like how we treat horses.
Yeah.
Not actually all that. They don't think the trees I don't know.
What is wrong with this?
Well, Terry, that one over here. And you got your team. No, it's not for states. No, it's our right to partake. See, I'm not a no, it's like I look at the like it's to be over like different times you have like before you get some subjector you have some percent or 30 years or something like that. No. No, because it's more like a licensing. It gives you the capacity to acquire the goods on the same. Yeah, I don't yeah, I don't think that. Yeah, I was actually kind of. I thought that was a good idea. Like, so here's the alternative. You're here, you want to take other people's property, lives away from them, and we can't stop you. Well, here's the thing. Do you really no, you go back over with where more people are I don't think he's not here. He's probably first, but he'll see. I don't know that it is. I'm not sure what, I mean, what's why should I think for that? It's not right here.
Okay, let's wrap up our conversations here. Moving on to the next session.
It's confidence.
Mean what I say, guys. Might have to play some Justin Bieber in here or something.
Only if you win the popular vote.
Sorry to be down here, but yeah. This next portion of the conference is basically what you've been doing, talking, but just a little bit more in directed fashion. So this is going to lead into the speaker panel, and basically we want you guys to go into groups of like 5 or 6, just to discuss what we've been talking about today, you know, electoral reform, drug policy, the charter, stuff like that. Yeah, and come up with questions to ask our speakers. Because, you know, sometimes when, you guys are pretty good generally, but when people ask questions usually at the end, sometimes, you know, it's kind of long-winded, and here we're just gonna go straight at it, get the speakers to go boom, 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 like here is what we think, and yeah. So, not really, I didn't plan this part out, but I'm hoping you'll help me. Just gather yourselves into groups of 5 or 6 around the room, and give you pieces of paper to write your thoughts on. So.
You got this right here.
And I know it's human nature, but try to go into like brush yourself with people that you haven't met yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was just reading that.
Because people who voted for them, some people voted for him going for it. So people who against him.
Yeah, it is.
Safe drug use.
Or
I think it's interesting to tell that, like, you know, we grew up in the US, like, so this concept, before we lived in China, so like, oh, you know, the government's trying to
Take it up. I'm a freeloader.
Especially, you know, Ron Paul was running for president, libertarian things like marijuana legalization started to happen, we started turning to wars. Now we're starting to see through more of a, you know, to us, it almost is, I think a lot of us in the US are starting to realize that, like, the idea of individual liberty is just like